Hey there, everybody. Good morning. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of Ranking the Albums. Today we're going to look at the studio discography, rather short, but quite influential, quite groundbreaking, of the American death metal act, Death. Were they the first death metal band ever? That's kind of debatable. I think Possessed might have a little something to say about that, but definitely one of the bands that really helped pioneer the Florida death metal sound, or death metal in general. Started out as a juggernaut of a ferocious extreme metal band. Death kind of came on the scene when, what was extreme metal? Extreme metal was in its infancy, but towards the end of their career, the second half of their career, still extreme metal, but very, very sophisticated. Moved into a lot of really cool progressive waters, right? And unfortunately, with the death of Chuck Schuldiner, the band obviously was no more. But what they left behind, a great catalog of some very, very strong albums. All right, I'm going to rank them from my least favorite to my favorite, but I will say right off the bat, there was never a bad Death album. I like all of these albums quite a bit. Some I like a little more than others. I tend to, I don't want to give too much away because there's one period in the band's history that I kind of really cherish more than the other. But, I remember being a young kid. Well, I don't know how much a kid I was, but, in the late 80s, I was in my early 20s listening to these guys for the first time and thinking, whoa, that's pretty different. Right? That's a little bit heavier than Megadeth or Metallica or Slayer, right? Kind of like something new. But I remember thinking that, Jesus, this is pretty intense stuff. I can totally dig it. And I've been following them, listening to their music ever since. It was a shame when, Chuck passed away and they were no more, because I think they still had plenty of good music left in them. And, again, he was the really only constant throughout all of their recorded history. It was basically a revolving door of guitar players, bass players, and drummers alongside Chuck, who sang and played guitar. A phenomenal guitar player, one of the better growlers of his generation, I also think. So let's get started, shall we? So I'm going to go from my least favorite, still a very solid album. Okay, I'm going to go with Spiritual Healing from 1990. Now, this probably where Death started to do a little more kind of more refined extreme metal. It's still death metal, of course, but those first two albums are absolutely brutal. Not that this one isn't, but here's where you can start to see a little bit of the more intricate things that the band were going to be doing going forward. Chuck here joined by James Murphy, all right, renowned lead guitar player from a lot of death metal acts. Terry Butler on bass. No, not that Terry Butler. Bill Andrews on drums, and Eric Grief plays a little bit of keyboards here and there. So definitely a very strong album. Just my least favorite of the Death catalog. Coming up next, I'm going to go with the album that came right before it, Leprosy. Okay, released in 1988. Probably takes the formula from Scream Bloody Gore a little bit further. All right. Really, really strong stuff here. And I remember, the first time I bought this LP, looking at that cover art, and I was like, holy moly. That's pretty wild stuff, right? So we got Chuck on guitar, Rick Ross also joining on guitar, Bill Andrews on drums, and Terry Butler. Credited with bass, but from all purposes, he did not play on the album. So it was probably Rick or Chuck who played bass on the album. All right, but some real, Leprosy, the title track, is very, very good. Forgotten Past, Left to Die, Opa Casket, Pull the Plug, relentless juggernaut of a death metal song, Choke on It. All right, I know some folks probably don't like this death metal thing, but man, these guys were one of the best. One of the best. Choke on It, such a great killer closing track. I dig that album a lot. Dig it a lot. All right, so we're going to go next up. The beloved Scream Bloody Gore from 1987. Again, raw, unpolished, absolutely pummeling. Zombie Ritual. Sacrificial, mutilation. I mean, all the song titles and the lyrics just absolutely disgusting, but that's all right. Regurgitated Guts, Baptized in Blood, the title track, Scream Bloody Gore, of course, the amazing Evil Dead Just an incredible album, just pummeling. There's nothing, there's no finesse here. This is just in-your-face, destructive, pulverizing death metal. Chuck Schuldiner, Chris Reifert on drums, Ed Riepke designed the album cover, of course. All right. Randy Burns on percussion, also produced. John Hand possibly played a little guitar in here, but who knows? So this is basically the kind of Chuck Schuldiner show, right? Getting things started. So a very fine album. All right, so now is where things get really interesting in the Death catalog. Now is when the band and Chuck in general is really starting to get into kind of more challenging arrangements. Okay, proggy and jazzy kind of elements kind of creeping into the music, really technical arrangements, blistering lead guitars, all right? The riffs are just absolutely crushing, intricate double bass and blast beat drumming, all right? His vocals even starting to take on a little more of a rasp instead of those deep growls from early on the albums. I'm going to go next with 1991's Human. Okay. Here is kind of where you had, once again, another different lineup. You got Chuck joined by Paul Masvidal and Sean Reinert, of course, from Cynic. All right. We just lost Sean just, a week ago. Okay. Steve DiGiorgio on bass. Steve, another renowned guy who's played with so many acts, Testament and so on and so forth. A fantastic album. And again, here's where the kind of like the more progressive leanings of Death really starting to come into play. Suicide Machine. Secret Face. Lack of Comprehension. Vacant Planets. Flattering of Emotions. Those weaving guitar riffs and solos. Okay, the really kind of challenging technical arrangements. Fantastic stuff. Not a bad song on this album, and arguably you could say, like all these albums kind of going forward, for me anyway, absolutely perfect progressive death metal albums. Okay, not that I don't love the three that I already mentioned, but those are kind of Death still in their infancy, still really kind of working their way towards what we're talking about now. Next, I'm going to go with their last album, okay, The Sound of Perseverance, released in 1998. This, at times, throughout the years that I've been listening to Death, has been one of my favorite Death album. It kind of comes and goes and slips in and out of the top spot or the top two spots. I'm going to go with number 3 because I think the top 2 for me have really hit home with me in recent years. But I think that for those of you who maybe have not listened to this band, maybe aren't that into extreme metal or death metal in general, I think that this is the album to listen to. Sound of Perseverance, again from 1998, Nuclear Blast Records. This is Death, much more accessible sounding. This is as much a progressive metal album as it is anything else. Chuck's vocals are less harsh on this album. The arrangements are really intricate, really proggy. A lot of kind of jazz fusion passages going on here. You got Shannon Hamm on guitars. You got the great Richard Christie on drums. Of course, Richard played with Iced Earth, Charred Walls of the Damned. He was a member of the Howard Stern Show for many years. Scott Clendenin on bass. Okay, you got also, a couple other players who pop in and out on here. But, man, just a killer album. Really melodic. Scavenger of Human Sorrow. Spirit. Crusher. Voice of the Soul. Really cool instrumental. It's like you hear that and you think, God, I wish this band did more stuff like that. A Moment of Clarity. Painkiller. They do a cover of Painkiller on here. It's very cool. All right. Story to Tell. Great songs on here. Again, Death at their most accessible, but still brutal enough, right? I mean, that's the key. All right. This is the album that's really kind of risen for me, that overtook Sound of Perseverance, and I think is, in fact, before we went on the air, I put this on again. I'm like, yeah, that's a good one. 1993, Individual Thought Patterns. A killer album with some just absolutely smoldering guitar work. So again, keeping with the changing of the guard of the members, Chuck on vocals and guitars. He brings in Andy LaRocque on lead guitar, co-lead guitar, of course, from King Diamond's band. Kind of a different player to be in a band like this, right? And he added some really cool solos on this album. Really tasty solos. Interesting to hear him playing alongside Chuck. Steve DiGiorgio, of course, on fretless bass. And on drums, Gene Hoglan from Dark Angel. Strapping young lad, right? A monster drummer. Some killer songs on here. The rip snorting, just crazy technical jealousy. Overactive imagination, all right? How about Mentally Blind, the title track, Out of Touch, The Philosopher. Absolutely face-melting songs. I love the way that both guitar players just kind of weave around each other with Hoagland's machine gun-like drum riffing going on underneath. DiGiorgio with that fretless bass, almost like he's like the Jaco Pastorius of death metal or extreme metal or heavy metal in general, right? A killer album that only gets better with additional listens. Okay, but coming in at number one, an album that just, for me, just kind of symbolizes everything that's so great about this band, because it combines the kind of punishing, brutal, early nature of their music with the more technical, melodic, and progressive side that they would start midway through their period. Symbolic from 1995. An absolutely amazing album. Okay, an amazing album. You got Chuck joined by Bobby Coble on guitar, Gene Hoglan, of course, again on drums, and Kelly Conlon on bass. And man, the title cut. Best death song ever. Symbolic. Absolutely destructive in its force. The riffs are massive. All right. There's these cool technical parts where the band speeds up and then slows down. You got Zero Tolerance. Another absolutely amazing song. All right. The epic Crystal Mountain, and Chuck's vocals on that are just rip through your very soul. All right, Perennial Quest, another great song. All right, Empty Words, Thousand Eyes, just top to bottom, absolute perfection from this band, and it's just produced so well. And it just, if you've heard, no death at all, but maybe like heavier music, okay, I would urge this album probably easily. Just go listen to this album. Any of the last couple that I've talked about are easily their most kind of progressive sounding albums. But man, this is just an unstoppable album, start to finish. Death at their absolute best. Hard to beat. All right, hard to beat. So there you have it. Let's recap. My favorite. I'm going to rank my favorites here. My favorite is Symbolic. Number 2, Individual Thought Patterns. Number 3, Sounds of Perseverance. Number 4, Human. Number 5, Scream, Bloody Gore. Number 6, Leprosy. And number 8, Spiritual Healing. Again, not a bad album in the lot. Each one of them, great for what they are. I like some a little better than others, but for me, I love and appreciate the early albums just because they're such a big part of the early extreme metal scene. But man, it's what they did with the second half of their career that just kind of set them apart from so many bands. And you had a lot of other bands doing that kind of technical thing, at the time. Atheist, another band that comes to mind. Okay, a lot of really good kind of more technical bands. But man, as far as I'm concerned, none of them did it kind of like these guys. Okay, so curious to see which death albums you prefer. And hey, if you're not into extreme metal or death metal, I totally understand. But for all of you out there who like this sort of thing, want to hear from you which albums you prefer and why. Also, this is on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, of course, we're on YouTube all the damn time. What do we got coming up? We got more of these Ranking the Album series, all right? Over the next couple days. Yes, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Queen, Dream Theater, Symphony X, all sorts of other acts. And then they may not come in that order, but those are the ones that are kind of brewing on the immediate back burner. All right. We've got a new product show coming up for you hopefully later today, or if not today, tomorrow morning. I know I've been talking about the new Magnum CD. All right. What else? Also, Blood Incantation for your death metal fans. Going to do that as well. So a lot of good stuff happening. All right. The new Nectar CD. Been digging that the last couple days. That's coming up too soon. So don't miss any of it. I'm Pete Pardo. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Of course, we're on the mighty YouTube all the damn time. We'll see you again tomorrow. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.